My cheating wife lost it when I refused to sign the birth certificate for her affair child. The moment I found out about her affair, my world imploded. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of loyalty, all wiped out in one crushing revelation. For weeks, I'd noticed subtle changes in Melissa. Her late nights, mysterious phone calls, and the way she guarded her phone like a lifeline. But it wasn't until she came home one night with a look of pure panic that I knew something was horribly wrong. It's funny how life can flip in an instant. One minute, you're making dinner plans, talking about your future, and the next, you're standing in a storm of betrayal. That night, she didn't give me any excuses. She didn't lie. Instead, she blurted it all out, her face twisted in a strange mixture of guilt and fear. The truth hit like a sledgehammer. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "and it's not yours." I don't think I reacted at first. The room spun as my brain tried to process the words. The baby, the one we had dreamed of together for years, the one I was ready to raise as my own, wasn't mine. But the worst was yet to come. She wanted me to pretend it was. To be the man who'd stand by her side and sign that birth certificate, as if everything was normal. As if I could ever forget that the child belonged to the man she'd been seeing behind my back. That's when I felt something snap inside me. I stood there, hands shaking, staring at her. The nerve, the audacity of this woman I had trusted with my heart and soul. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice colder than I thought possible. "I'm not going to be a part of this lie." Her reaction was instant and explosive. She screamed, throwing accusations at me, calling me selfish for not standing by her, as if I was the one who had betrayed her. Her words hit me like sharp daggers, each one designed to tear through my resolve. Melissa's anger was raw and vicious, but underneath it all, I saw fear. She was terrified, and that fear fueled her rage. "You're just going to leave me like this?" she shrieked, her face red with fury. "I made a mistake, but we can fix this. You can't just abandon me now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Abandon her? I wanted to laugh, but the weight of it all kept me grounded in a cold, numbing disbelief. How could she twist the situation so expertly, making me feel like the villain? My entire life had just been torn apart, and somehow, she was the one feeling betrayed? "I'm not abandoning you," I said quietly, forcing myself to stay calm, even though my insides were churning with fury. "You made this choice. You chose him. Now, you're asking me to clean up the mess." "You're my husband," she cried, her voice breaking. I thought you loved me enough to..." "To what?" I interrupted, the anger bubbling to the surface. "To pretend that everything's fine? To live a lie for the rest of my life? To raise someone else's child and call it mine? Is that what you thought love meant?" She stared at me, her chest heaving, eyes wide with desperation. The silence between us stretched, and I knew in that moment that whatever we had was dead. She had killed it, and now she wanted me to play a part in her perfect little fantasy, where none of this had ever happened. "I can't do it," I whispered, shaking my head. "I can't be that guy." Melissa's expression darkened, and just like that, her fear turned back into fury. She lunged at me, her fists pounding against my chest as she screamed. "You're a coward," she yelled. "You're pathetic. I hate you." I didn't move. I just let her hit me, because in a way, I deserved it. I had let this go on for far too long, ignoring the signs, pretending everything was okay, when it clearly wasn't. When she finally stopped, panting, her face twisted in a scowl, I looked her dead in the eyes. "This is over," I said simply. Her face paled, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had once loved, the woman I thought I would spend my life with. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me. I walked out of the room, but I didn't walk out of the mess. It followed me like a shadow, weighing me down as I moved through the house. My mind raced with 100 thoughts. What was I going to do next? How had it come to this? I had to face reality now. The marriage, the future I had envisioned, the family I thought we would have, it was all gone. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the cup of cold coffee I had poured hours earlier. I hadn't even taken a sip. I could still hear her upstairs, her sobs muffled by the walls between us, but I felt numb. I was done. The phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my daze. It was my brother, Ryan. He had been my lifeline for the past few weeks, ever since I started noticing Melissa's strange behavior. I hadn't told him everything, just enough for him to know something was off. "Hey, you all right?" Ryan's voice came through the phone, calm but concerned. "No," I replied, my voice hollow. "It's over, man." She told me everything. There was a pause on the other end. "Everything?" Ryan asked cautiously. "She's pregnant," I said flatly. "But the baby isn't mine." I could hear Ryan's sharp intake of breath. "Jesus. I can't even look at her right now. She wanted me to sign the birth certificate, pretend like it's mine. Like nothing happened." Ryan's voice hardened. "You better not even think about doing that. You have no obligation to clean up her mess." "I know," I sighed, running my hand through my hair. "But it's still a lot to take in. I loved her, man. I don't know how it got this bad." "She made her choices," Ryan said firmly. "This isn't on you. You can't let her guilt you into thinking it is. You did everything right." I wished I could believe him, but deep down, part of me wondered if I could have done something different. Maybe if I had paid more attention, maybe if I hadn't been so busy with work, maybe if I had fought harder to save our marriage before it fell apart. "What are you going to do?" Ryan asked, breaking the silence. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I can't stay in this anymore. I can't raise another man's child, pretending like it's mine." "Good," Ryan said. "I'm glad you're thinking clearly. You don't deserve this." We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about logistics, lawyers, paperwork, what to do next. But as I hung up the phone, the reality of what I was about to do hit me like a freight train. I was going to end my marriage. I was going to walk away from the life I had built with Melissa. And no matter how right that decision felt, it didn't make it hurt any less. The next few days were a blur of awkward silence and tension. Melissa kept trying to talk, trying to explain, but I shut her down every time. I couldn't handle hearing any more of her excuses. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw, and I had no interest in rehashing what was already clear. She had chosen someone else over me. The child she carried wasn't mine, and there was no future left for us. I spent most of my time at work, drowning myself in tasks just to avoid going home. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting across from her at the dinner table, pretending that life was somehow normal. At least at the office, I could focus on numbers, reports, anything that didn't involve thinking about her. But the moment I walked through the front door each evening, reality hit me again like a wave. The house felt suffocating. Her presence was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. And despite the cold front I had put up, she kept trying to talk to me. "I know I messed up," she said one night, her voice cracking with desperation. "But we can fix this. We can find a way through this. Please, just talk to me." I didn't even look at her. I walked straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and took a long sip before finally turning to face her. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, my voice flat. "We're done." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No, we're not. You can't just throw everything away because of one mistake. We've been through so much together. You can't just walk away from me." "Watch me," I said, my words coming out colder than I intended. Her eyes widened, her face crumbling as she realized I meant it. "You don't mean that," she whispered. You can't just leave me like this." I set the beer down on the counter and took a step toward her, my voice soft but firm. "You left me a long time ago, Melissa. You made your choice when you decided to sleep with someone else. You chose him. You chose this life. And now, you have to live with it." She started to sob, collapsing onto the couch. I stood there, watching her fall apart, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I just felt nothing. I turned and walked away, leaving her to cry alone. There was nothing left to say, nothing that could fix the damage she had done. As far as I was concerned, the woman I had loved was gone. And so was our marriage. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected, mostly because I had prepared myself for this moment the minute she admitted to the affair. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. I was ready to move on, ready to cut ties and start over. But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. A week later, I came home to find Melissa waiting for me in the living room, her face pale and tear-streaked. She held a piece of paper in her trembling hands, and the second I saw it, my stomach twisted. I got a lawyer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's going to fight for custody. Custody? My mind reeled. What was she talking about? I wasn't going to fight her on custody. The baby wasn't even mine. Melissa, I said slowly, my heart racing. That's not my child. You know that. She shook her head, her tears falling harder. I know, but my lawyer says it doesn't matter. If I can prove you've been the primary father figure, you might still be liable for support. The room spun as her words sank in. Was this really happening? She was going to drag me into a legal battle over a child that wasn't even mine? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Liable for support. How could I be responsible for a child that wasn't even mine? My fists clenched at my sides as I fought the urge to shout, to scream at her for dragging me even deeper into this nightmare. But instead, I stayed calm, at least on the surface. You can't be serious, I said, my voice cold. You're telling me that after everything you've done, you want me to pay for your affair? You want me to pay for raising another man's child? Melissa's eyes were filled with tears, but there was something else there too, a look of desperation, of fear. She knew she had lost me, and now she was scrambling to salvage whatever she could. I don't want this either, she sobbed. But the law doesn't care about feelings. You've been my husband. We've built a life together, and if I can't prove the real father's identity, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was beyond betrayal. It was outright manipulation. She wasn't just asking me to stay in a broken marriage. She was asking me to pay for her mistake for the rest of my life. No, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I'm not doing this. I'm not signing any birth certificate, and I'm certainly not paying for someone else's kid. Get the real father to step up. Melissa's face crumpled again, her tears flowing freely. Please, just think about it. I'm scared. Okay? I messed up, and I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I can't do this alone. I stared at her, trying to understand how the woman I had once loved could have turned into this. Someone willing to throw me under the bus just to avoid facing the consequences of her own actions. Every fiber of my being screamed to walk out, to slam the door on this chapter of my life for good. But I couldn't ignore the knot of guilt forming in my gut. As much as I hated what she had done, a part of me still remembered the years we spent together, the dreams we once had. But that part of me was shrinking, fast. This isn't my problem anymore, I said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. You're on your own, Melissa. I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm, her grip weak but desperate. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. I can't lose everything. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me like this. I pulled my arm free, not even looking at her. You already lost me, I muttered before walking out of the room. As I drove away, my mind raced. I needed a plan, and fast. If she was going to try to drag me into some twisted legal battle over this kid, I needed to be prepared. I wasn't going to let her use the law to trap me in a life I didn't want. The first thing I did was call Ryan. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy, probably asleep after a late shift. I need your help, I said without preamble. What's going on? Ryan asked, his tone immediately serious. Melissa's trying to pull me into a custody battle, I said, barely containing my frustration. She wants me to pay for the kid, even though it's not mine. There was a long pause on the other end. She what? I explained everything, every word feeling more absurd as I said it aloud. By the time I finished, I could hear Ryan cursing under his breath. You need a better lawyer, he finally said. Someone who's dealt with this kind of thing before. You can't let her do this to you. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I know. I didn't think it would get this bad. It's worse than bad, man, Ryan said. It's insane. You've got to protect yourself. He was right. I couldn't afford to be naive anymore. Melissa was willing to fight dirty, and I had to be ready. "Thanks, Ryan," I said, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "I'll figure it out." But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a whole lot worse. The next morning, I called the best lawyer I could find. I wasn't taking any chances. Melissa was already gearing up for a fight, and I needed someone who would defend me, protect my interests, and make sure I wasn't dragged into a situation I had no business being a part of. When I explained everything to the lawyer, she listened quietly, taking notes. The whole time, I kept waiting for her to stop me and say this was all just a terrible misunderstanding, that there was no way Melissa could actually force me into paying child support for a kid that wasn't mine. But the longer she stayed silent, the more uneasy I felt. Finally, she looked up from her notes and sighed. "I've seen cases like this before," she said. "It's not common, but it happens. If Melissa pushes hard enough, and if the biological father isn't in the picture, the court could view you as the de facto father, especially if you've been together for a while and shared responsibilities." My stomach twisted. "But I haven't signed anything," I argued. "I haven't agreed to raise this kid." "That helps," she said, nodding. "But it's not foolproof. You need to be prepared for a fight. We'll argue that you were misled, that you had no knowledge of the affair or the paternity until recently, and that you have no intention of assuming responsibility for this child. But Melissa's legal team will probably paint a different picture. They'll try to make it seem like you were involved, like you're trying to abandon her now that things are tough." The whole thing made me sick. How had I ended up here, sitting in a lawyer's office, planning for a legal battle over a child that wasn't mine? I wanted to be done with Melissa. I wanted to walk away and never look back. But she wasn't going to let me go that easily. "What do I do next?" I asked, trying to stay calm despite the panic rising in my chest. "For now, gather everything," she said. "Any text messages, emails, financial records, anything that shows you've been trying to separate yourself from this situation. We'll need to build a case that proves you were deceived and that you're not responsible." I nodded, trying to focus, but my mind was spinning. Melissa's desperation had put me in the crosshairs of a nightmare I never saw coming. When I got home later that night, Melissa was sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in, but I could feel the tension in the air. This was going to escalate fast, and I knew it. "I met with a lawyer today," I said flatly, dropping my keys on the counter. "I'm filing for divorce, Melissa." She didn't respond right away. She just sat there, motionless, her fingers gripping the phone a little tighter. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold. "So that's it? You're just walking away?" "You walked away first," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You made your choice when you had the affair. Now you have to live with the consequences." She stood up slowly, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and something else. Maybe regret, maybe fear. "You think you're so righteous," she spat. "But you don't understand what it's like to be in my shoes. I made a mistake, but you're leaving me when I need you the most." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're trying to make this my fault?" I asked incredulously. "You cheated, Melissa. You lied to me for months. And now you want me to clean up your mess? That's not happening." Her eyes darkened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something dangerous. "If you walk away, I'll make sure you regret it," she said, her voice low. "You'll see." I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked out of the kitchen, her words echoing in my mind. The days following that conversation felt like a slow-motion train wreck. Each hour dragged by with the heavy weight of anticipation, knowing that Melissa wasn't going to let this go quietly. True to her word, she had her lawyer send me a notice demanding I reconsider signing the birth certificate or else face a prolonged legal battle. It was as if she was using every weapon she could to keep me tethered to her. Even though she was the one who had driven a wedge so deep between us, it could never be repaired. I was living in a constant state of anger, disbelief, and sadness. It was like I had been thrust into a life I didn't recognize, where the woman I once loved had become a stranger willing to drag me down with her. I spent my days on edge, waiting for the next confrontation, the next ploy to get me to bend to her will. A week after our last fight, I came home to find Melissa pacing the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. I let out a bitter laugh. "There's nothing left to talk about." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You think you can just walk away from this? From me? You think I won't fight?" "I'm sure you will," I said, shrugging as I dropped my bag on the chair. "But it doesn't change anything. I'm not staying. I'm not signing the birth certificate. And I'm not paying for your mistakes." Her face twisted in frustration. "You're being so cruel," she spat. "I'm carrying a child, and you're just walking away. What kind of man does that?" "A man who refuses to be manipulated," I shot back. "You expect me to stick around and play happy family after everything you've done? I'm not that guy, Melissa." She stepped toward me, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You don't think this will come back to haunt you? You don't think people will look at you and see the man who abandoned his wife while she was pregnant?" I clenched my jaw, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. "It's not my kid, Melissa. You're not going to guilt-trip me into staying." There was a long, tense silence between us. Her hands shook, and for a moment, I almost believed she felt genuine remorse. But then, her expression hardened again, and I knew that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the one I had married. This was someone else entirely. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "I'll make sure of it." Without another word, she stormed past me and out the front door, slamming it behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been, feeling the weight of her threat settle over me. This wasn't going to be a clean break. She was going to fight me every step of the way, dragging me into the mud if she had to. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. The next day, I met with my lawyer again, laying everything out on the table. The threats, the manipulation, the games Melissa was playing to keep me tied to a child that wasn't mine. My lawyer listened carefully, nodding as I spoke, and then leaned back in her chair. "She's trying to push you into a corner," she said. "And unfortunately, if she drags this to court, it could get ugly. But we'll fight it." "I don't care how ugly it gets," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not signing that certificate, and I'm not paying child support for a kid that belongs to someone else." She nodded. "Then we need to build a strong case. We need evidence that shows the affair was hidden from you, and that you had no knowledge or involvement with the pregnancy until she told you." I thought back to the months leading up to this disaster. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the lies that had been building under the surface. Melissa had done everything in her power to hide the affair from me, but now that the truth was out, she expected me to act as if it didn't matter. "Well, I've got plenty of texts and emails that might help," I said. "But how do I prove that I didn't know?" "We'll make the case based on timing," my lawyer said. "The fact that you filed for divorce shortly after finding out about the affair helps. And the more documentation you can provide, the stronger your position will be." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Melissa could threaten me all she wanted, but I wasn't going to let her destroy my life any more than she already had. With my lawyer on board, I started pulling together everything I could. Texts, emails, even the vague messages that seemed innocent enough at the time but now, in hindsight, were glaring red flags. Melissa had covered her tracks well, but not well enough. As I sifted through the evidence, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and sadness. How could I have been so blind, so trusting? But I didn't have time to wallow in self-pity. There was too much at stake. The day after I gathered all the documents, I came home to find Melissa waiting for me again. This time, she wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She was calm, too calm. That unnerved me more than her outbursts ever had. "We need to come to some kind of agreement," she said, her voice low, controlled. I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. "Agreement? About what?" She sighed, sitting down at the kitchen table, folding her hands in front of her. "I don't want to fight with you anymore. This has all gotten out of control. I just want us to handle this like adults." My eyes narrowed. There was something off about her tone. I didn't trust it. "Go on," I said cautiously. "I spoke with my lawyer today," she continued, "and I think maybe we can find a way to settle this without going to court. I don't want to drag you through the mud, and I know you don't want that either." I didn't say anything, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm willing to negotiate, she added. We don't have to go to war over this. You can still be a part of the baby's life, even if it's not yours. There it was, the catch. She wanted me to stick around, to be a father to a child that wasn't mine. A part of me had known this was coming, but hearing her say it out loud still sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. No, I said flatly. She blinked, surprised by my quick response. What? I said no, Melissa. I'm not going to play this game. I'm not raising another man's child, and I'm not signing any agreement that binds me to this mess. Her calm demeanor started to crack. But we were together for years. You can't just walk away from all of that. I'm walking away because you threw it all away, I shot back. You made your choices, and now you're trying to make me pay for them. I'm not doing it. She stood up, her face contorting with frustration. You don't understand, do you? This isn't just about the baby. This is about everything we built together. You can't just erase that. I let out a bitter laugh. Everything we built together? You mean the life you destroyed with your affair? That's what you're talking about. Her face flushed with anger, but I wasn't finished. Look, Melissa, I said, my voice softening slightly. I get it. You're scared. You don't know what's going to happen, and you're trying to find some way to fix this. But you can't. There's no fixing this. The marriage is over. We're over. And that child, it's not mine. You can't force me to stay. She looked down, her hands shaking as she tried to regain control. For a brief moment, I thought she might break down again, might show some kind of remorse. But then her eyes hardened, and I knew the fight wasn't over. You'll regret this, she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. You'll see. With that, she stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the quiet halls, leaving me alone in the aftermath of another battle. I knew this wasn't the last time she tried to manipulate me, but each time, her grip on me weakened. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the papers scattered in front of me. The divorce papers, the notes from my lawyer, the texts between Melissa and me. It was all just a pile of broken promises and shattered dreams. But it was also my path forward. I was done being her pawn. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. I want to push forward, I said firmly. I'm not backing down. Good, she replied. We'll make sure you're protected. Don't worry, we've got this. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but I was finally taking control of my life again. Melissa could threaten me, she could try to drag me down, but I wasn't going to let her win. As the days passed, I became more resolute in my decision to break free from Melissa's grasp. The divorce proceedings were underway, and although I knew the road ahead would be challenging, I felt lighter with each step forward. But the real test came when Melissa made her next move, a move I had half expected but still dreaded. One evening, I received a thick envelope from her lawyer. As I tore it open, my stomach dropped. Inside were the formal custody demands and claims for child support, exactly what Melissa had threatened. Despite everything, she was still pushing to make me legally responsible for her affair child. I sat down at the kitchen table, reading through the documents in disbelief. She had gone all in, laying out arguments that painted me as the stable father figure, claiming I had been involved in her pregnancy preparations, that I had been emotionally invested in the child before the affair was revealed. It was all twisted, a version of events that barely resembled the truth. My first instinct was to march over to her house and confront her, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I called my lawyer, walking her through the new claims. She remained calm, though I could hear the frustration in her voice. She's really playing hardball, my lawyer said after a pause. But this is standard in cases where the biological father isn't involved. She's banking on the court being sympathetic to her situation. That's insane, I said, pacing the room. The baby's not mine. She can't expect me to just take on responsibility like that. I agree, my lawyer replied. But we need to handle this carefully. We can challenge her claims, and we will. But this is going to be a long process. We have to be thorough. I hated how logical it all sounded. I wanted this to be over, to walk away clean, but I was stuck in a fight I didn't ask for. Still, I wasn't about to give in. After the call, I sat at the table, staring down at the custody documents. The absurdity of it all hit me in waves. I was being dragged into a legal battle over a child I had no connection to, a child born out of Melissa's betrayal. Yet, here I was, facing the very real possibility that I could be roped into this mess for years. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and decided to go for a walk, hoping the cool night air would help calm my nerves. The streets were quiet, and as I walked through the neighborhood, memories of my life with Melissa surfaced. We had built so much together, or so I thought. But now, it all felt like a lie. As I passed by familiar houses, couples sat on their porches or inside, watching TV through their lit-up windows. It made me ache for the life I thought I had. The comfort of knowing I had a partner, someone I could rely on. But that person was gone, replaced by a woman I barely recognized. I ended up at the park, sitting on a bench near the swings where we used to come on lazy weekends. I let the quiet wash over me, trying to push the anger away. I couldn't keep living in this storm of emotions, letting Melissa control every aspect of my life. I had to stay focused, had to keep my eyes on the future. I wasn't just fighting to get out of this mess, I was fighting for my own sanity. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. We went over the custody claim and the strategy to challenge it. "We're going to focus on the timeline," she explained. "We'll prove you had no knowledge of the affair, no involvement with the pregnancy, and that this child is not your responsibility. It's going to be a fight, but we're on solid ground." It was reassuring, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Melissa was determined to drag me into her web, but I wasn't going to let her. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a renewed sense of determination. This battle wasn't over, but I was prepared for whatever came next. Melissa had underestimated me, thinking she could bully me into submission. But I wasn't the same man she had manipulated for so long. I was ready to fight for my freedom. The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and strategy sessions with my lawyer. Every step felt like a slow crawl toward freedom, but at least I was moving in the right direction. Still, the weight of the battle with Melissa hung over everything, a constant reminder that even though I was doing everything right, it wasn't going to be easy. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart stop. It was from Melissa, and it was a single line that sent a chill through my spine. Asterisk, "I'm willing to make this public if I have to." Asterisk, public. My mind raced. She was threatening to drag our private hell into the open, using it as leverage to force me into submission. I could see it now, the social media posts, the lies she'd twist to make herself look like the victim, to paint me as the heartless husband who abandoned her in her time of need. The damage to my reputation, the whispers behind my back, it could all spiral out of control. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone still clutched in my hand. I knew Melissa was desperate, but this was a new low. She was willing to ruin both of our lives just to get me to bend. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't let her threats throw me off course. My lawyer had warned me this might happen, that when people felt cornered, they would lash out. And that's exactly what she was doing. But I wasn't going to let her win. I typed out a reply, my fingers shaking slightly. Asterisk, "Do what you need to, but I'm not backing down. This ends in court." Asterisk, I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Almost immediately, my phone rang. It was Ryan. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I saw that message you sent earlier. What's going on?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "She's threatening to go public. She's trying to make this as ugly as possible." Ryan cursed under his breath. "Jesus, man. She's really going off the deep end." "Huh? Yeah, looks like it," I muttered, staring out the window. "She's not going to stop until she gets what she wants." "And what exactly does she want?" Ryan asked, though I could tell he already knew the answer. "She wants me to take responsibility for the kid. Sign the birth certificate, pay child support, be the father," I said, bitterness creeping into my voice. "It's like she thinks if she pushes hard enough, I'll just give in." Ryan was silent for a moment. "You're not actually considering it, are you?" "No," I said quickly. "There's no way. I'm not doing that. But I need to be ready for whatever she tries next." "You've got the lawyer on it, right? You're protected?" "Yeah, I replied. We're building the case. But it's going to be a fight. Ryan sighed. Man, this is insane. I knew Melissa was manipulative, but this is another level. I didn't respond, my mind already racing through the possibilities. If she took this public, the fallout could be huge. I had to prepare for the worst, even though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. After hanging up with Ryan, I sat in silence for a long time, my thoughts heavy. Melissa's desperation was spiraling out of control, and every move she made seemed more reckless than the last. But the more she tried to push me, the more determined I became to stand my ground. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again to discuss the latest development. She's threatening to go public, I said as soon as I sat down in her office. She's trying to smear me, make this as messy as possible. My lawyer nodded, unfazed. I've seen this before. Don't worry. We'll be prepared. How? I asked, frustration boiling over. How do I stop her from turning this into a circus? You can't stop her from making threats, she said calmly, but you can control your response. We'll make sure your side of the story is airtight. The truth is on your side. She can play dirty, but it won't hold up in court. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. She was right. I couldn't let Melissa's tactics scare me into backing down. I had to focus on the facts, on building the strongest case possible. What about the public stuff? I asked. Can she really smear me like that without consequences? If she starts making false accusations, we'll counter with defamation, my lawyer explained. She's free to share her story, but if she crosses the line, we'll take legal action. Don't worry. We have options. It was a relief to know that I wasn't powerless. Melissa could try to twist the narrative, but I wasn't going to let her destroy my life without a fight. As I left the lawyer's office that day, I felt a surge of confidence. Melissa could threaten me, could try to drag my name through the mud, but I wasn't backing down. I was fighting for my freedom, and nothing she did would change that. As the weeks rolled on, Melissa's threats escalated. She became more erratic, sending me long, rambling texts late at night, alternating between anger, guilt-tripping, and pleading. One minute she'd be furious, accusing me of abandoning her and the unborn child. The next, she'd beg for forgiveness, telling me how much she needed me, how we could somehow rebuild from the wreckage of her affair. But I had already built up a wall around myself. I read the messages with a sense of detachment, like they were coming from a stranger. Melissa had burned every bridge between us, and now all I could focus on was making sure she didn't drag me down with her. Then, one evening, I got another message, this one different. No pleading, no anger. Just a cold, calculated statement. Asterisk, you'll regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. Asterisk, I knew what she was hinting at. Going public with her version of events, painting me as the heartless man who walked out on his pregnant wife. She'd twist the narrative to suit her, and I knew people would buy it. Social media was a powerful tool for sympathy, and Melissa would use it to her advantage. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone when it buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Melissa. It was a message from one of my old college friends, Julie. Asterisk, hey, just saw something on Facebook. Is everything okay? Asterisk, my heart sank. I immediately opened the app, searching for Melissa's profile. And there it was, a long, emotional post detailing how I had abandoned her during her pregnancy, leaving her to raise our child alone. She wrote about the struggles of being a single mother, the heartache of betrayal, and how she never thought the man she married would turn his back on her in the worst possible way. The comments were already flooding in. Sympathetic messages from friends and family, people offering support, some even calling me out without knowing the full story. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me as I scrolled through the post, reading one hateful comment after another. She's really doing this, I muttered to myself, shaking my head in disbelief. It wasn't just the lies that hurt. It was how quickly people were willing to believe her version of events without even asking for my side of the story. She had painted me as a monster, and everyone was eating it up. I immediately called my lawyer, pacing the living room as I explained what was happening. She's posted this whole sob story on Facebook, making it sound like I left her high and dry. It's all lies, but people are already turning on me. My lawyer remained calm, as always. This was bound to happen, she said. But don't worry. The court doesn't care about social media. What matters is the evidence. Let her play her game. It won't hold up where it counts. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Yeah, but my reputation is already taking a hit. People I know are turning against me. I understand that, she said sympathetically. But you need to stay focused. We'll deal with the public side of this once we've settled the legal matters. For now, don't engage with her online. Don't respond to any of the comments. Just keep gathering your evidence. I knew she was right, but it was hard to stay calm when my entire life was being picked apart by people who didn't know the truth. After hanging up, I sat back down and stared at my phone, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. How had it come to this? Just a few months ago, I had a wife, a marriage I thought was solid, and now I was dealing with a public smear campaign, all because Melissa couldn't face the consequences of her own choices. For the next few days, I laid low. I didn't engage with anyone online, no matter how tempted I was to defend myself. It was hard, watching the comments pile up, but I trusted my lawyer's advice. If I stooped to Melissa's level and started slinging mud back, it would only make things worse. But one night, I got a call that changed everything. It was Grant, the man Melissa had been having the affair with. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I found out about the affair. As far as I was concerned, he was just as guilty as she was, and I wanted nothing to do with him. But when his name flashed on my screen, curiosity got the better of me. I answered, my voice cold. What do you want? There was a pause on the other end before Grant spoke, his voice low and tense. We need to talk. About what? I snapped. There's nothing left to say. It's about Melissa, he said quietly. She's dragging me into this too, man. I didn't realize it until now, but she's not just playing you. She's playing me too. I felt a flicker of surprise, but I kept my guard up. And why should I care? Because she's losing it, he said, his voice urgent. She's spiraling, and she's going to take both of us down if we're not careful. Hearing Grant's voice and his unexpected admission that Melissa was spiraling sent a jolt through me. I never imagined I'd be on the phone with the man who had blown my life apart, but his tone was filled with urgency, almost panic. I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing. What do you mean she's playing you too? I asked, my voice sharp with suspicion. Grant sighed heavily on the other end. Look, I didn't sign up for this drama, all right? Melissa made it sound like she was leaving you, like things were already over between you two. I didn't know half the stuff she was hiding until recently. Convenient, I said coldly. That didn't stop you from getting involved with a married woman. I'm not saying I didn't mess up, Grant snapped, his frustration clear. I'm just telling you that she's not being honest with anyone, least of all me. She's been stringing me along, making promises she can't keep, and now she's got me tangled up in this custody mess too. I felt a pang of something, maybe anger, maybe pity, hearing him say that. Melissa had fooled us both, using us like pieces in her game. But I wasn't ready to forgive or forget what he'd done. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice low. You think I'm going to team up with you or something? Grant hesitated, his voice softening. No, I don't know what to do. She's out of control, man, and it's only going to get worse. I thought you should know. I sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. Melissa wasn't just trying to manipulate me. She was burning every bridge around her. It wasn't enough that she had wrecked our marriage. Now, she was dragging Grant down with her, trying to twist the situation to fit her narrative. You're on your own, I finally said, my voice steely. I don't care what kind of trouble you're in with her. That's your problem now. I figured you'd say that, Grant muttered, defeated. But if she keeps this up, she's going to take us both down. I hung up without saying another word. The last thing I needed was to get dragged into more of Melissa's chaos through Grant. He could deal with his own mess. I had enough on my plate. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake what Grant had said. Melissa was spiraling, fast, and with every new legal maneuver, every new threat she hurled at me, it became clearer that she was losing her grip on reality. She wasn't just desperate to make me responsible for her affair baby. She was willing to destroy everything in her path to get what she wanted. The next court hearing loomed on the horizon. My lawyer was optimistic about our chances, especially after Melissa's increasingly erratic behavior became more apparent. We were preparing to challenge the custody and child support claims with everything we had, using every piece of evidence to prove that I wasn't involved with her pregnancy and that this child wasn't my responsibility. But just days before the hearing, Melissa made one last desperate attempt to pull me back into her orbit. It was late at night when my doorbell rang. I was sitting on the couch, trying to relax after another long day of preparation, but the sound startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour. When I opened the door, Melissa stood there, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes wild with panic. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you." I didn't move, my hand gripping the door tightly. "What are you doing here, Melissa?" She took a shaky breath, her eyes searching mine. "I've lost everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grant's left me. My family doesn't want to talk to me. I have nothing except you." I stared at her, my heart hardening. This wasn't love. This wasn't regret. This was desperation, pure and simple. "You don't have me," I said, my voice cold. "Not anymore." She started to cry, her body shaking as she pleaded with me. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I know that. But we can fix this. Please, just give me another chance. I'll do anything." I shook my head, stepping back. "It's too late, Melissa. This is over. I'm not your way out. I'm not your safety net." Her sobs grew louder, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything she had done. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. I couldn't let myself be drawn back into her chaos. "Please," she cried again, her voice breaking. "I can't do this alone." "You should have thought about that before you cheated," I said, stepping back into the house. "Goodbye, Melissa." I closed the door in her face, her sobs muffled by the wood between us. For a long time, I stood there, listening as she eventually gave up and walked away. It wasn't the closure I had imagined, but it was closure all the same. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had finally taken back control of my life. The court date finally arrived. It felt like the culmination of months of anguish and battle. Walking into that courtroom, I was determined, but the tension was palpable. Melissa was sitting on the opposite side, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. She looked tired, like the weight of everything had been pressing down on her, and while I couldn't ignore that part of me still felt pity for her, I had to remind myself of why I was here. My lawyer had prepared me well. We were ready to counter every claim Melissa had made, especially about the child. The fact that I had never signed the birth certificate and had no legal obligation to the baby was our strongest argument. Melissa's attempts to manipulate the situation, even dragging Grant into it, had weakened her case. The proceedings started, and as expected, her lawyer leaned into the narrative of me being the husband who had abandoned her during her pregnancy. They painted me as cold and unfeeling, a man who had walked out when things got tough. It was infuriating to listen to, but I stayed quiet, keeping my emotions in check. That was their strategy, to paint me as the villain. When it was my lawyer's turn, she laid everything out with precision. Every piece of evidence we had gathered, every text message, every financial record showing I had no part in the pregnancy preparations. The timeline of events proved beyond a doubt that I had been kept in the dark about the affair, that I had no connection to the child. The turning point came when my lawyer introduced evidence of Grant's involvement. Despite Melissa's attempts to sideline him, he had become part of the case, and the court couldn't ignore that he was the biological father. When Grant's name came up, Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her lawyer's face tightening. Then came the DNA test. Melissa had fought it initially, but the court had ordered it. The results were irrefutable. The child wasn't mine. The room seemed to still as the reality settled in. Melissa had lied, twisted the facts, and now it was all unraveling in front of her. Melissa's lawyer tried to recover, arguing that I had still been the primary father figure during her pregnancy, that I had supported her emotionally and financially. But my lawyer shot that down with the timeline we had built, showing that the affair had been kept hidden until it was too late. As the hours dragged on, it became clear which way things were heading. Melissa's case was falling apart, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. I wasn't going to be trapped in this mess any longer. When the judge finally ruled, it was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I wasn't responsible for the child. I wouldn't have to pay child support. Melissa's attempts to manipulate the situation had failed, and legally, I was free. Melissa broke down when the ruling was announced. She tried to plead with the judge, her voice shaking as she begged for reconsideration. But it was over. The court had spoken, and there was no turning back. As I left the courtroom, I couldn't help but glance back at her. She was sitting there, her head in her hands, sobbing quietly. Part of me felt a pang of sadness for her. This woman who had once been my wife, who I had loved, who I had built a life with. But that part of my life was over now, and I had to move on. Ryan met me outside, clapping me on the shoulder. "You did it," he said, smiling. "You're free." I nodded, feeling the relief wash over me. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I'm free." It was hard to process, though. After months of fighting, of being dragged through the mud, it almost felt surreal. But as I walked out of that courthouse and into the fresh air, I knew that I had made it through the worst of it. That night, I went home and sat down on my couch, looking around the house that had once felt like a prison. Now, it felt different, lighter, like I could finally breathe again. Melissa was out of my life for good. And while there was still a long road ahead, moving forward, rebuilding, I knew I could do it. I had made it this far. I poured myself a drink, raising the glass in a silent toast to myself, to surviving, to fighting back, and to the future. The phone buzzed next to me, and I glanced at the screen. It was Ryan, sending me a simple message. Asterisk, onward and upward, bro. Asterisk. I smiled, leaning back on the couch and letting the tension finally melt away. The relief I felt after the court ruling was immense, but as the days passed, I realized that winning the legal battle was only the first step. I still had to rebuild my life. The divorce was still in motion, and Melissa's outbursts weren't entirely behind me. She had gone quiet after the ruling, but I knew her well enough to understand that this wasn't over emotionally, at least not for her. A few days after the court hearing, I received another message from her. It was shorter than usual, and unlike her other messages filled with anger or guilt-tripping, this one was almost resigned. Asterisk, I guess this is goodbye. Asterisk. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't know if I should respond or just let it go. Part of me wanted to acknowledge that yes, it was goodbye, and part of me wanted to leave her message unanswered, just like she had left my life in ruins. But in the end, I simply put the phone down and walked away. No response. It was time to stop engaging, stop giving her power over me. I spent the next few weeks trying to adjust to the new normal. With the court ruling in my favor and the divorce moving forward, I focused on myself for the first time in what felt like years. Ryan and I caught up more often, grabbing drinks or watching games, and I found myself leaning on friends I hadn't spoken to much during the whole ordeal. It felt good to reconnect with people who had no part in the chaos, people who reminded me of who I used to be before my world had been turned upside down. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into my projects, taking on new responsibilities and enjoying the escape it provided. The mind-numbing focus of my work helped me keep the noise at bay. The endless swirl of thoughts about how my life had shifted, the disbelief that things had gotten so bad, so fast. But as the weeks went by, the pain lessened. The anger dulled. I was moving forward, slowly but surely. I had dinner with Ryan one night, and over burgers and beers, he brought up something that caught me off guard. "So, are you ready to start dating again?" he asked casually, taking a sip of his beer. I almost choked on my bite of food. "Dating?" I asked, half laughing. "I don't think I'm anywhere near ready for that." Ryan shrugged. "You've been out of the game for a while, I get it. But you're single now, man. You've got your whole life ahead of you." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Yeah, but it's too soon. I need to focus on getting my head straight. Besides, I don't exactly trust myself when it comes to relationships right now." "Fair," Ryan said, nodding. But don't close yourself off forever. You'll be ready when you're ready. Just saying, don't let this whole thing turn you into a hermit. I smirked. I'll keep that in mind. The thought of dating felt distant, almost foreign. I couldn't imagine trusting someone again, not after what Melissa had done. The betrayal had been too deep, too raw. But maybe Ryan was right. Maybe one day, when the dust had fully settled, I could open myself up to someone new. For now, though, I was content with just learning how to live on my own again. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. It happened quietly, almost anticlimactically, considering everything that had led up to it. Melissa didn't make a scene, didn't throw one last curveball my way. We signed the papers, and just like that, it was over. 7 years of marriage, reduced to a handful of signatures and legal formalities. I walked out of the lawyer's office that day feeling lighter than I had in months. It was truly over. Melissa was out of my life, for good this time. No more drama, no more lies, no more manipulation. I could finally close the door on that chapter and start fresh. That evening, I went home and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, just looking at myself. I barely recognized the person staring back. So much had changed in such a short span of time, but I had come out the other side stronger than I thought possible. I wasn't the same man I had been when this all started. I had been broken down, torn apart, but I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see a future again. Ryan was right. Onward and upward. I poured myself another drink, toasting to the end of an era and the beginning of whatever was next. As I settled into the new normal, I realized that healing wasn't about simply moving on. It was about rediscovering myself. The divorce had stripped away so much of what I thought defined me, but now I had a blank slate. It wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about figuring out who I was without the shadow of Melissa looming over everything. I spent more time with friends, reconnected with family, and started doing things I hadn't done in years. Simple things that had always made me happy but had somehow gotten lost in the chaos of the marriage. I picked up hiking again, went fishing with my dad, and even took up photography, something I hadn't done since college. It felt good, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried for too long. One afternoon, while out on one of my hikes, standing at the top of a hill and looking out over the vast landscape, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. The noise in my head had quieted, the anger had dissipated, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about Melissa, the affair, or the legal mess she had dragged me through. I was just present. It felt good, and it felt like I was finally, truly free. Ryan checked in with me often, still dropping little hints about dating. I kept brushing him off, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't close myself off forever. There was life after Melissa. I just had to be ready for it when it came. A few months later, I got an unexpected email from Melissa. The subject line was simple: apology. I hesitated for a long time before opening it. Part of me didn't even want to hear what she had to say. What was the point? It was over. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Her message was brief, surprisingly so, given the lengthy emails and messages she'd sent in the past. There was no pleading, no manipulation, just an apology. She acknowledged that she had made a series of terrible mistakes, that she had hurt me in ways she couldn't take back. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and she didn't try to make excuses. She simply said she was sorry. I read it twice, unsure of how to feel. A year ago, I would have wanted this, some acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. But now, sitting there with her apology in front of me, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no relief, just nothing. I closed the email without responding. I didn't need closure from her anymore. I had found it on my own. As time passed, the wounds began to fully heal. Life moved forward, and I moved with it. I wasn't the same person who had stood in the middle of that storm months ago. I was stronger, wiser, and more aware of what I wanted out of life. I had learned the hard way that trust and loyalty were everything, and I wasn't going to settle for less again. One night, Ryan and I sat on my porch, beers in hand, talking about the future. He mentioned dating again, and this time, I didn't brush him off. "Maybe I'll give it a shot," I said, surprising even myself. Ryan grinned, raising his beer in a toast. That's what I'm talking about. Onward and upward, right? I laughed, clinking my bottle against his. Onward and upward. As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt hopeful. The past was behind me, the weight of it lifted, and for the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem so uncertain. It seemed wide open, full of possibilities. Melissa's chapter in my life had closed, and a new one was just beginning. Thank you for sticking with the story. If you've ever had to rebuild after a betrayal or faced something difficult, share your experience in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories like this one. Remember, no matter how tough life gets, there's always a way forward. Onward and upward.